welcome to another episode of A Feminine Moment. I am Cherry Lynn, and I'm so excited to be here with Dixie Andelin Forsyth. Hi, Dixie.
Hi, Cherry.
Dixie is the author of Fascinating Womanhood for the Timeless Woman, now an international Amazon bestseller. We are here today to talk about trust. We have been having a lot of discussion about this on our private Facebook group. A lot of ladies have been talking about this, asking us questions about trust in their relationships. Turns out this is a really big subject in general for women, whether they're married or dating. So Dixie, I want to ask you, how would you define trust? What are we talking about?
Yeah, trust is, like you said, it's absolutely vital to any relationship, friends or anything, for it to survive and last over time. And as we all know, human beings are far from perfect, and they make mistakes, and we hurt each other's feelings. So trust is constantly kind of built and rebuilt over time in a healthy relationship. But we like to think of it as, it helps me to think of it like a bank account. When you first meet a person, you tend to give them a certain amount of trust if they're nice, just because you have no reason not to trust them unless you get really weird vibes at first. And you give them a certain amount of trust, not complete trust. But then as you get to know them, when you have good experiences with them, it's like a deposit put in that bank account. And then when they hurt your feelings or something, there's a disagreement, then that's like a withdrawal taken out of the bank account. But what happens over time, you can build up quite a hefty bank account with a person, a spouse, a parent, even a child. You know, that relationship can handle quite a few withdrawals and not bankrupt it. But when you have a situation, a relationship where they keep withdrawing, and they're not really depositing much into that bank account, it can become bankrupt, where there's really nothing left. And each of us, you know, I can't tell anybody when their bank account is bankrupt, but you can kind of know when you look at it and you think, is there anything left in this account? And what I've noticed is that women, because of our natures, tend to hang in there longer with a pretty meager bank account. And so when a woman is done, she feels bankrupt, it's kind of hard for a guy to get her back. And not all women are exactly the same, of course, but when you trust somebody and you trust them more and more as they keep putting deposits in, you have not just fun times, but you get through hard times together. Say you lose a loved one, you lose a parent. That's a very difficult time. Lose a job, something that's really stressful, and your spouse gets you through it, or you get through that together. That is like a nice big fat deposit in your bank account. And you get through something together, and you feel closer. That's like a big deposit. So that when he is, kind of says something kind of thoughtless or insensitive or whatever, your relationship can handle it because you have so many deposits. It doesn't mean it doesn't need to be repaired, but it means that it's not that hard to repair it if you work on it. And as you first date, you're dating someone, the same exact thing is true. And hopefully there'll be enough deposits in that bank account that when you decide to marry someone, there's a pretty hefty bank account there built up for you. You trust them quite a bit. Yeah. And you don't marry someone when there's maybe $100 in there when there should be $50,000.
That makes sense. And now, are you saying that we all have these, in a sense, like the metaphoric bank accounts? Do we all have, like, men, women, children,
Sure.
everyone
it's like that, and we can all relate to a bank account, except little kids don't know what that is. But we can relate to something, someone depositing and withdrawing. Let's say your spouse or your boyfriend, you find out he has cheated on you, or your spouse has. That could be a big enough withdrawal that it bankrupts it. It depends on the person. Some women can survive that sort of thing if they find out their spouse has cheated on them, and some just simply can't. And it just depends on the woman. Sometimes, we're talking about women, sometimes because of the experiences we've had in our lives with our family or other prior relationships, we're kind of jaded and don't trust easily. That's another issue. So we've gotten some questions and comments from people that are very suspicious of their husbands or boyfriends, and they start looking in their phones and trying to look to see if they've cheated on them or are thinking of cheating on them.
Or just snooping. I think it's very common to just kind of snoop.
Now, if you, especially for women, but when we do things that cause our boyfriend or husband to potentially distrust us, like when we start snooping through his cell phone or his Facebook. Sometimes we, because of prior relationships or things like that, or family situations growing up, we become very suspicious people because of post-traumatic stress, maybe. Every situation is a little different, but so that's why each of us as women needs to think about why we're distrustful. Sometimes you grow to distrust your guy because he's acting suspicious. Maybe he is, maybe it's your perception. But you need to be really careful of that, because if you snoop into his phone, he may grow to not trust you. The other part to the subject of trust is, what if he loses trust for you? What do you do? And honestly, open communication and being upfront is always the best. If you have a good reason to suspect that he's cheating, you got to handle it very carefully, because if you do snoop and find out he's been, I don't know what you'd find out in a phone.
One of the things we recently had on our group was a man was just looking at images.
Okay, there's a lot of problem. Some women have problem with it, but lots more men have problem with pornography. We discussed this one other time. Pornography is a type of cheating, in my opinion, because it involves another person, and it's also very addictive. But let's just say that the worst happens and you find out he's into pornography. You can't change him. You can confront him, but will that make him stop? Not probably, unless he is motivated to personally or wants to. So how you go about that? And this feminine moment isn't about addictions, really. This is about trust. If he has lost trust for you, then you're in a spot yourself. Because what do you do? And I think we've had women ask, what if he's lost trust for me? How do I get that back? It's much harder to get trust back once it's lost than to build it in the first place. But it's possible, but it takes longer. And so you have to be very patient. You have to consistently put deposits in that bank account, sincere ones, not fake ones, into that bank account over a period of time. And some may think, I don't have the patience for that. It's not like you apologize and the next day everything's fine.
What about those circumstances with the women who have had relationships where they've been cheated on prior, or men that have had relationships where they've been cheated on prior, or maybe they've just had some upbringing that just naturally...
Trustworthy or trusting. Sometimes a person is trustworthy, but they don't trust easily because they've had trust betrayed so much. And that calls for, nobody really likes this. It calls for a lot of patience. and long suffering with the other person, because this is really common today. People get together and they've been married before. They've had prior relationships, prior marriages, children. Sometimes it's really common. So Mary and Jim find each other and they realize it intellectually, but sometimes emotionally you don't always realize you may have other issues with a prior. Kind of can't help bringing a little bit, and both of you might. So what would be very best in this situation is obviously fascinating womanhood. You might say, well, he needs to understand me, and that's true, but you can't make him do it. But he will tend to do it as you put the deposits into that virtual bank account. Are long suffering enough with him when you get to know him well enough that you know the things that trigger him and the things that trigger you. And as you do that, you'll be able to think, we're in the basement. And it isn't really about me. And what we're talking about, this is a lot of maturity, but you can do it. People have the amazing ability to mature and become really patient and giving, especially women. And that's why we talk about in Fascinating Womanhood, written for women, describing our core strengths. And it's what you can develop.
Can you describe what trust looks like in your relationship and how you started with your husband? Because I know that you dated for a relatively brief time in comparison with a lot of couples, and you, 4 months?
The advantage we had is neither of us had been in a serious relationship before. I mean, Bob had dated tons. I had dated very little because I was 19 when I got married, and I didn't date a lot when I was in high school. I didn't start really dating a lot till college. We didn't have a lot of stuff to sort through. When I married Bob, he had quite a thick wall of reserve around him. It was based on experiences he had in his family growing up. He didn't like the way his mother treated his dad. She was just kind of acted like he was kind of silly. Bob's father, he said, well, I wanted you to have the best, meaning himself. He was begging for a compliment. And she said, well, the best is none too good. And I remember my heart sinking when I heard that, because I thought, this man is starving for admiration. And she was a good woman. He was very ambitious, and he was a school teacher, but always wanted to better himself. So he thought, I don't ever want to be in a relationship like that. Now, when I met him and dated him, I had no idea.
Right.
That was because my parents had a completely different relationship. When I was talking the other night, we were talking about how when we got engaged, he was really old-fashioned. He went out and bought the ring, and he was going to give it to me that night. The day that he gave me the ring, I had like half a dozen phone calls from different guys who had heard I was engaged and begged me not to get married. I thought that was pretty validating for me.
I don't flattered, yeah.
I don't know how they knew I was getting engaged. I didn't tell a bunch of people, but I told them, guess what? These different guys called me and it was so weird. His immediate response was, do you need more time? Do you need to not get engaged yet? And I thought, no, it scared me. He was so quick to let me out of the engagement, that I thought, if I make one false move, he's going to say, it's okay, we don't have to get married. So it was only over time I realized this was his wall of protective reserve. And it took about 5 years, I would say, for him to really kind of melt that wall and really trust me. And it's over all these deposits, some withdrawals, but mostly deposits in our relationship. I used to say to him, you're such a good husband. He'd say, we haven't been married long enough. He doesn't ever say that now.
Yeah.
I'd say, come on, 50 years. It isn't important that you're together 10 years before you get married, because you have to know everything about him. You should know things like his family, if at all possible, if he has any family, his friends. That's what we talk about in the rat filter. Does he have friends? Does he have family that communicates with him? Basic things like that. For Bob and I, our trust level is really deep because we've been through so many things together. Things that are death of all of our parents. We've been through death of a grandchild. That was really, I didn't think I'd ever have to go through that. Financial reversals, college, surgery, all kinds of stuff. And those can really strengthen your relationship.
What I hear the most within trust and difficulties with trust is, well, I've been cheated on before, or I'm worried he's going to cheat on me because I'm insecure. And I think what's helpful about your story with Bob is that, well, maybe you didn't go through that, but you had other things. And you had
are you kidding? Lots of
reasons to not trust each other. It doesn't really necessarily matter. I mean, I think in some extreme scenarios it would matter, but it doesn't necessarily matter what the issue was in the past, but everyone has something.
Well, he had women in his practice who came on to him all the time. And, I mean, he was all dressed up. I was taking care of babies. He was dressed up when he went to the hospital, and he had women after him a lot. He still does.
So that brings up a good point. How do you handle that?
I really was in love with him and still am, and really wanted to marry him. And I said, no, I was just letting you know that I was in demand. But I sensed, because women tend to be more sensitive, even though we don't understand it. At 19, I didn't understand all this, but I knew that I wanted to assure him. And when we were dating, he said to me once, I want to marry someone who wants to be with me, not married to me because of my relationship to somebody or what I was going to become, but who wanted me. And I thought, that's me. The subject of trust is extremely important, but as women, we need to understand our part in it, because if you have trust issues from your past, you kind of need to cut him a little bit of slack that he doesn't necessarily know. His experiences may be different than yours, and if you're super suspicious, that can actually be a withdrawal from your bank account. And if you're worried about him texting women, it's better to work on your relationship, because it's really all you've got. Practice the principles of fascinating womanhood. If he is cheating on you, I'm sure it's going to come out. You don't have to be a detective and snoop around and do things that might erode trust for him. What if he is not doing that? Other parts of your relationship are going to be also not so great. You don't have to snoop on his phone or his laptop to realize you're growing apart, or he's being distant, or things like that.
You're saying more than likely there will be other signs.
Because if you're feeling really close to him, you're not going to be feeling all the time like snooping into his phone. So what you need to be working on is the relationship that you're having regular dates, or if you're not doing that, if you're not talking, if you're not having that close romantic relationship, you can do your part of working on that. See, there's some couples that are kind of content with a mediocre relationship because it's sort of status quo. It's kind of working, and they don't. It's like my mother used to say. They're used to having weeds when they could have flowers, or crumbs when there's a big banquet table, and they get used to the crumbs. Some people really are kind of like, don't mess with my relationship because it's sort of working. So
Fascinating Womanhood is where we say we want it to be great. We want the flowers.
People actually say the romance is meant to end. When the honeymoon's over, and then you get back down to real life. And I think it didn't have to end, because the feeling you had when you were in the honeymoon phase, the infatuation, when you first feel that infatuation for another person, and in Timeless, I call that, like, that's the seeds of the deep romantic love, infatuation. It isn't the whole thing. It's just the beginning. And you really start to go through things together, and you really learn to appreciate the other person in their good times and bad. That's when the deepest romantic love can come into your relationship. Because to have that deep romantic relationship, you've got to have a lot of trust, if not almost complete trust. Put deposits into that bank account. and try not to take, you're going to take withdrawals out, just like in a real bank. You're going to, because you're human, you make mistakes.
What are some ways to make deposits if there's ladies out there that have a really low bank account and they're thinking, I don't even know where to start. How can I start to even build this back up?
It's developing a real relationship with him. It's accepting him. It's the key stuff. Accepting him at face value, and practice that by focusing on his strengths, the positives, the reasons you married him, and noticing what he does, the way he looks, all the positives that you can see, and comment on it specifically. Men they don't really care that much about, oh, you're a great guy. You know, he wants to hear specifically what you see in him. Focusing on your femininity. Understanding men is so important. Being feminine. Follow us on these channels and YouTube. Work on yourself. You can start with small things and see results, but you've got to be patient. And getting through things together, these are all deposits.
Well, I think this has been such a great topic. I love this discussion. I think it's been so motivating. Thank you so much for all of your advice. The bank account part is just really eye-opening. I think that's such a great way of thinking about it. And I hope all the women out there watching, if you do have trust issues, get on our Facebook group. If you're not already on there, that's another really great way to stay motivated. Thank you so much. And for everyone that wants to find us on social media, I'll attach everything down below. Don't forget to like and comment, share. If you have any questions, we'd love to answer them. Go ahead and comment below, and we will see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.